Let me start by asking, Safina. I think one of the challenges that at least I personally see is like, in the outer school, like children domain. I remember like talking to government officials and like they would very proudly brandish the data. And I think this is like, say, way back in 2014, which said that India has like less than 3% of outer school children and was justifiably so, like one of the biggest achievements of our education system in the last like 20, 30 years, that we've ensured that children are at least having access to like a physical school building, right? And I think right now, where we are speaking, one of the biggest worries that people have, and I don't think so anyone would have an answer, and so probably you will be the best person to give your inputs on that, is what will happen to the outer school children right now? Like, what is your sense about both the numbers? How will it affect the most vulnerable sections of society? We know what income shock does to things, for example, like education and nutrition. Are there things that we can do to minimize that? So from the vantage point of Educate Girls and the communities that you work with, like where does the entire outer school children scenario like look like?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think we have to understand, yes, you're right, that we've made a lot of progress in terms of access. However, there is still a very large number of children who, even pre-pandemic, were not actually in school, whether they fall off the data map. And the other thing that we've seen is that they also tend to concentrate in certain geographies. And really, under concentration, there are two things. There is poverty and there's social marginalization. So you're really talking about what Sonali was saying. It's the most vulnerable. Generally, all the out of school children are the most vulnerable. So and so if it was 3%, and now they're saying, after Ebola, out of school children, and especially out of school girl numbers tripled. Are we going to see a similar trend for us, right? Or more? Like, what is it going to really be? Because Ebola wasn't an 18-month or 15-month sort of a lockdown. So I think the situation for the out of school children are going to be very severe. I think their numbers will grow exponentially because the vulnerability has increased because of the poverty, because of loss of livelihood, because of all of those pieces. So I think we have to be very prepared. And I don't think we will be prepared unless we totally understand the granularity of it, because not all out of school children are the same. And I think the way we plan and the way we kind of think about them is really key in being able to just kind of mitigate for that, right? Or to be able to address this situation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. Like, for example, I was teaching a camp last year with tribal children, and one of my boys, he is now working in a coal mine. Right, his mother has gone off and she's working as construction at a construction site in Bangalore. And this boy, his mamas, his uncles have taken him, and they're working in some kind of a mine. Now, he was last March before the lockdown. He was 10 years old, and this year he's going to be 12 years old. That boy, is he really going to come back to school? How are we going to find him? How are we going to make sure that he finds his path back into the school system? And this is one boy, Nitin, that I'm talking about, but there are millions of children like this. For them, this is going to be the new reality. And a 10-year-old to a 12-year-old, his needs might be really different. What has he seen in this time? And is school still going to feel relevant for him to kind of come back, right? So I think there's so much to kind of unpack there, but I think we have to see, and this is a boy. So there are two important things. This is a boy we had data for because he was already in a school system. So we can track him still. But his younger brother would have been 3 years old at the time when the pandemic started. And his younger brother would now become like 5 years old and getting ready to get into first grade. We don't even have data for those children. So there are two problems. One is the children whose data we do have, and how are we going to track them back, and what are all the bottlenecks? The second is the kids, the new enrollments, where we don't have sufficient data. Then we have people who have come in, the migrant kids who've come in, etc. We will need a strategy for finding them as well. I think we will need really a special focus on the transition kids, especially for girls, the transition from 5th to 6th grade. So if you think about it, a girl who was at the end of her 5th grade last March needs admission in 7th grade. And moving from a primary to an upper primary school, we're going to lose her, right? Is that really going to happen? So I think we'll have to really break it down, because there are targeted segments that we will need to really kind of focus on. And I think when we think of back to school or build back better, that is going to be our first and our foremost and our most critical metric of success. Is saying, have all the children, have we found all of them? And have we been able to kind of bring all of them kind of back into school? And I think we will also need to think about the super vulnerable are people who Children who are permanently at risk of not, could be COVID orphans, right? They may be at permanent risk of not coming back to school. So we have to have a special strategy for that. And I think finally, like let's say a girl was failed the ninth grade last March. What happens to her? So we will need sort of these permanently at risk who may be beyond the scope of RTE now. They cannot be mainstream, and we will need a plan and a backup plan for those kids, right? Second chance programs. Those are the other pieces that we will have to make sure that those girls who made it all the way up to eighth or ninth can actually still complete that last sprint and still complete their education. Otherwise, it's a huge loss to society. And I think so that's how we have to kind of really sort of think through this holistically. We've got to break the problem down. And then finally, I think the approach really needs to be to take everybody along, all of your stakeholders. You're talking about your sarpanch, your ward punch, your teachers, like everybody needs to be involved in this in a really kind of strong and authentic way. I think we will have to make the re-enrollment, or when kids come back into school, the enrollment process really seamless. We see this, like sometimes the Samagra ID or the Aadhaar card or all of those things become big bottlenecks. So we'll have to just make sure that we get rid of all this and saying, just come back to school. We will see that another time. And we can't be stuck on the administrative pieces. I think we will have to plan in such a way that we put our enrollment camps in the poorest areas, in the most vulnerable areas, right? Don't put it outside the school. Put it where the community is, where the Juggi Jhopadis are, and really kind of focus where the Manrega, site is, so that parents don't have to sort of come on a special day. Put it where near the ration shop or whatever. I think tracking, monitoring, very credible, clear, and authentic messaging to all, and communication to all stakeholders to really reassure them and manage their anxiety. And I think all of this boils down to having the right resources, right? Are the schools going to be funded well enough to have the health, hygiene, other facilities so that the teachers are supported in making all of this kind of happen?
I think you touched on like the really, really important points because, and I remember people like you talking about that, like what were the success stories of even like mobilizing, Andolan, led by the community to ensure that like the most vulnerable, I think Sonali mentioned the last child, like being enrolled in schools, etc. One natural question comes is that like, what is the role of parents, for example, like, in this entire dynamic? On one hand, you see a lot of demand for education happening. But on the other hand, you also see, for example, especially right now, people are genuinely worried about that, like how much will parents, for example, prioritize education? And even in the interim, what is the role that they can play in terms of like both supporting their children? So what is your point of view there?
Yeah, so I think the pandemic, one good thing is everybody's kind of realized that there is a parent that can actually be engaged in doing this, right? And pre-pandemic, I think, especially for poor people, right? Because parents have never been to school. I think when their children come into the school, the power dynamic is so unequal. They have always just been talked down to. They have always just been kind of spoken to saying, "Acha, bacche ko dimag kam hai, ye theek nahi hai, wo theek nahi hai, aap aisa nahi karte, aap waisa nahi karte." We've always just spoken at them. And now we're suddenly seeing that there's a real power of engaging with parents authentically, right? And there's a lot that they can bring to the table. We've run Camp Vidyas, which are these small neighborhood camps last year at Educate Girls for over 250,000 children last year. And we've seen the surge of parent engagement. They come in and they help you manage the small group. We've had a lot of people who've come and lectured at the camp. They've said, "Acha, what is the history of our village name?" And then there's an elder person who's coming in and kind of talking about it. And I think there's so much that you can leverage for learning. And we've always just had this block. We've had these sort of mechanical pieces like SMCs, but not authentic engagement and collaboration with parents. So I think that's really the fabulous pieces. Everybody's seeing that there's so much power. In my own camp, I mean, I ran it, this tribal woman, Kashi, she gave me her house to run it in. So in her hut, I collected all the children. She helped me manage the classroom. She sang along all the songs. She would run around and help the kids count all the bartan in her, and every item in her hut so that they could practice their counting. There is so much that they have to give to the education system. And I think we've been, really kind of cut off from that. So I see that, there is a huge piece there. There's a willingness from parents. And however, we have to change our lens on how we speak with them. We have to bridge this power dynamic. We have to stop talking down to parents. we have to really sensitize our entire systems to engage authentically with parents and to really kind of bring them to the table.